Hello, and welcome to the Net Zero Technology Centre and our webinar, Insight60. You'll probably notice something different. We're actually live on camera today. The format's slightly changed, and I hope you enjoy it. It certainly is a new experience for us, so we're looking forward to it. So today, in Insight60, we'll be exploring some of the issues pertaining to net zero travel, which is fabulous because I want to go to Australia, I want to be sustainable, I want to travel on business. How do we achieve that? So we have a wonderful guest from the Aerospace Technology Institute who's going to tell us all about that. And we also have a great panel to help with the session after the presentation. I'm very pleased to be welcoming Dr. Cristina Garcia-Duffy, Head of Technology at the Aerospace Technology Institute. Cristina, hi.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here today.
It's great to have you with us. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the ATI?
Sure. So I work at the Aerospace Technology Institute, or ATI. I'm head of technology at the ATI, responsible for our sustainability agenda. I'm also leading and responsible for our technology strategy for UK aerospace. And I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I've been in the research arena throughout my career, either at industry or at the ATI, developing programs, delivering programs, or delivering strategies.
Super. So it sounds like you're exactly the right person to tell us all about our future when it comes to sustainable air travel. Christina, I'm not going to tarry. We've got lots to cover, and I'm sure everyone will have some fantastic questions for you. So over to you now, presentation for 30 minutes. Good luck.
Great. Thank you very much. So let me provide you with a background to my organization first. So if we could have the next slide, please. The ATI was launched in 2013. We're a collaboration between the UK government and industry, and we were launched by an entity called the Aerospace Growth Partnership. We develop and launch the strategy for what technologies will be required by the sector to have maximum UK content in aircraft that will come into the market in the next few decades. To deliver this strategy, we help industry build projects, and we advise government on how to allocate the funding for those. So far, we have launched 343 projects with a value of £3.2 billion since 2013, and there's hopefully much more to come. A great part of our strategy is to ensure new aircraft technologies continue and contribute towards environmentally friendly aircraft. About half of our portfolio is towards decarbonising the aviation industry. If I could have the next slide, please. We support innovation at all levels through funding, thought leadership, connecting the sector, and launching targeted initiatives to support either specific pieces of technology or specific types of organizations. I'll give you a couple of examples. So as an example, you see there the Fly Zero project. We received 15 million funding from government last year to deliver Fly Zero, which is going through its first phase. This phase is bringing about 100 secondees from industry organizations and research organizations to explore the feasibility of bringing a zero carbon emission aircraft into the market at around the year 2030. And the outcomes for this work will be delivered in March next year, which will be the provision of technology roadmaps, a commercial case, and a market case, should there be one that is feasible. Other initiatives that you can see there include, for example, NATEP, the National Aerospace Technology and Exploitation Programme. This is an instrument providing funding and support for small and medium enterprises that are starting their journey in the research arena. If you're interested in any of the opportunities, do not hesitate to get in touch. And next slide, please. So now that I have provided you with an overview of ATI, let me focus on today. And today, what I'm going to talk to you about is how the aerospace sector is and will be decarbonizing in the next few decades. My topic is divided into 3 areas. First, I will talk to you about how aircraft flying have an impact on the environment. Second, I will talk to you about the measures we're putting in place to achieve a net zero carbon aviation sector by the year 2050. Third and lastly, I will talk to you about how the ATI program is delivering on this strategy. And the reason why this is important is decarbonizing aircraft tailpipe emissions. It's possibly the most difficult and challenging challenge facing the aviation sector in the long term, forgetting about COVID, of course. Next slide. So let me cover my first point, which is how aviation has an impact on the environment. Aviation is responsible for about 2.4% of global anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Most aircraft flying today burn kerosene and produce other emissions beyond carbon dioxide. Other emissions include nitrogen oxides, water vapor, unburned carbon, and other particles. If all the effects are combined, aviation impact on climate change is somewhere between 3.5 and 5% of global climate impact. Also, in the vicinity of airports, aircraft affect local air quality through their emissions. They also produce noise, and they're a source for ground contamination through ground operations. Next slide, please. We released our latest ATI strategy for UK aerospace technology back in 2019. And it is called Accelerating Ambition. If you want to go through it, I would encourage you to go to our website and you can download the strategy. Sustainability in aerospace was identified as its top priority. And our approach to sustainability is broad, certainly broader than carbon dioxide emissions. We look at emissions, of course. I mentioned noise and local air quality. We also cover materials, for example, reducing the use of hazardous materials and coatings, and also looking at different types of materials that are more sustainable. We also look at waste. Most of the waste we look at is in the manufacturing processes, so by reducing the waste of materials when we build components. You may have heard about near net shape manufacturing technologies, for example, and we also look at the waste from aircraft at the end of their life. And we look at ways of designing the aircraft to be more recyclable when they finish their life in 20, 25 years. In the ATI, we take a life cycle approach to sustainability. So we look at the end-to-end process from when we extract the raw materials, from when aircraft are flying through the 20-25 years up to when they are recycled and disposed of at the end. We measure progress as well at the ATI. We have whole aircraft modeling capability and sustainability and environment modeling capability so that we can track how many programs we have addressing which areas of sustainability and how far we are from goals that have been set by the industry, sometimes in a voluntary basis, sometimes as a standards or on a sort of in-law basis. Next slide, please. And achieving sustainability in the aviation sector is complex, and unfortunately, there's no single solution. We need to look at different areas. The majority of the ATI portfolio focuses on delivering more energy efficient aircraft. And we do this by improving aerodynamics, reducing the weight of components across the aircraft structures, on the systems, on the propulsion system. And of course, very importantly, we help industry develop more energy efficient propulsion systems. We also look at how aircraft fly and operate, both on the ground and in flight, and we look at optimizing the operations of the aircraft. A big part of our portfolio, because of the content in UK industry, is on the manufacturing side of things. We partner with a lot of the manufacturing companies in the UK within aerospace, but also we have fill-ins from other sectors in the manufacturing arena. We work very closely with the high-value manufacturing catapults. And on the sustainability side of things is all around improving the energy efficiency of the manufacturing and assembly processes, and also reducing the waste. We look also at more sustainable through life engineering services. So these cover better processes and better technologies for maintenance, repair, and overhaul activities, which are not insignificant, especially for major aircraft components, such as propulsion systems. And we also look at more sustainable ways of managing the aircraft end of life. Finally, a very important side of our portfolio is exploiting alternative energy sources. As you all know, most aircraft today burn kerosene to fly, and kerosene is an excellent product for aircraft because they require a lot of energy, and the volume and the mass is very important in aircraft development. So we're looking at alternatives to kerosene that have lower life cycle carbon impact. You may have heard about sustainable aviation fuels. Now, within the ATI, we focus on technology on aircraft. So we're currently not having many projects in the sustainable aviation fuels arena. This is more outside of aviation, I would say, on the fuel producing side. But we recognize that these will be essential to decarbonize the sector. We are also looking at completely new energy sources, and we're partnering with different organizations on battery development for aircraft use, for those aircraft that can fly with a battery as their main energy source, and looking at other alternative energy sources such as hydrogen. And the Fly Zero program that I mentioned before is focused mostly on using hydrogen as a direct into the propulsion system of the aircraft as a fuel and energy source for that. So we look comprehensively at the approaches to address our environmental impact. Now, if we focus on decarbonisation, if I could have the next slide, please. So the sector has recognized decarbonisation as a goal for many, many years now. And the industry has voluntarily committed to achieving certain goals at global, European, and UK level now for many years. From a global perspective, we have ICAO, which is an international organization. It represents 193 nations worldwide, national governments. And through that organization, the industry has committed in the past to achieving 1.5% fleet fuel burn improvement per year, so year on year, from the year 2009 to 2020. And research, we have shown that this has been achieved in the past. Now, this is at fleet level and global level as well. So it not only includes technology on aircraft, but it also includes the operational aspects of those aircraft. We have also committed to carbon neutral growth from 2020. So this means not increasing the aviation sector footprint, even with passenger demand increases. And we see that most of our carbon neutral growth, at least in the shorter term, will be delivered through offsetting via an instrument called CORSIA, which is an ICAO instrument to offset emissions. And it's in place now and will be in place until 2035 for now. At European level, through ACARE, which is the Advisory Council for Aeronautics Research in Europe, we committed a few years ago to a strategy called Flight Path 2050. This strategy has goals not only on carbon emissions, also on nitrogen oxides, on noise, recyclability, and other areas, but specifically on carbon. The commitment was to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by the year 2050, and that was relative to the year 2005. At UK level, we're committed to delivering net zero carbon by 2050. And what that means from an aviation perspective is every flight that leaves UK soil, be it domestic or internationally, will contribute towards this net zero carbon. So the way that government assess our emissions is very much around the tailpipe emissions of the aircraft. All of these at global, European and UK level, all of these goals are now being revised. ICAO have a long-term aspirational goal. They're developing that right now with different scenarios. And the aim is that in their next assembly in 2022, the grouping of experts will provide a view to ICAO on what those goals may be. At European level, many of you will know that the European Green Deal was announced, and that looks at climate neutrality by 2050. In the UK, there's a consultation that has been launched by the Department for Transport. It's open until September the 8th, and it has a number of questions they're consulting on what they call Jet Zero, which is how the aviation industry will reach net zero carbon by the year 2050. This consultation and the responses to those will inform the DFT decarbonisation strategy for aviation, which is due to be released later this year, we hope. Next slide, please. So why is aviation very difficult to decarbonize? Well, first, kerosene is the best fuel for aviation because of its energy per unit mass and energy per unit volume. We cannot currently, or I don't think we will ever be able to capture carbon coming out of the jet pipe of an aircraft, so we cannot recycle it. And also the sector is growing. The sector is doubling every 15 years. So there's double the amount of passengers about every 15 years. So keeping up with that growth is very difficult indeed. You can see here a typical graph that we have for decarbonisation. This would be at global level. The y-axis is showing international aviation carbon dioxide emissions in millions of tons, and the x-axis is showing a time from now, or well, 2010 in this case, until 2050. We have different measures to decarbonize aviation. As I mentioned, no single solution will suffice. So decarbonizing is going to be a combination between improving aircraft technology so that we have more energy efficient aircraft, also improving aircraft technology so that we may bring zero carbon emission aircraft into the market in future. It includes operational improvements, both on the ground and in flight. It includes sustainable aviation fuels, and it includes market-based measures, which are things like taxation, incentives by governments, offsetting. We have CORSIA, we have the EU emission trading scheme, we have the UK emissions trading scheme. So there's a lot of trading schemes and offsetting, which will be necessary to reach our goals. Moving on to next slide. So having a closer look at carbon footprint, what I'm showing here is the spread of carbon depending on the type of aircraft. The largest proportion of carbon emissions comes from the large commercial passenger segment. About 99% of the total % of the total carbon dioxide share comes from those large passenger aircraft that bring you internationally. And aircraft flying longer distances contribute to most CO2 emissions. So Stephen was talking about flying to Australia, that would form part of that 95% emitting aircraft. We're not catching with the demand, the growth in demand. And the biggest issue is that for these aircraft, hybridizing the aircraft, electrifying the aircraft, or using hydrogen is not feasible with current technology. So we need to continue to study this. We need to continue to develop technology and hopefully to find a more sustainable solution. These are the aircraft that for the foreseeable future will fly with sustainable aviation fuels when these are available at scale. And hopefully, if hydrogen has a breakthrough in technology, and this is some of the findings we're getting from the Fly Zero program and Airbus and others, we may be able to take part of that CO2 share and launch aircraft that are powered with hydrogen, which is zero carbon, if it's green. Next slide, please. So there's different solutions for different areas of the market. What I'm showing here is different market segments, as we call them. On the top right-hand side, you see the larger aircraft that carry many passengers over long distances. The focus, our strategy, the focus for those aircraft that we call core technology is that they will be more efficient aircraft. So we invest in propulsion, in systems, and in structures for those aircraft, and they will be powered by sustainable aviation fuels. The UK has a very strong position in that market segment. We have a lot of the larger companies in the world doing research in the UK in most of the areas that I've talked about, and there's intense competition in this area. Next generation of aircraft are about 20 to 23% more efficient, and it's a big market segment. We're expecting revenues of about $6 trillion over the next 20 years. Then on the lower side of the market, you can see there about now, there's a Zero Avia project, which we funded called High Flyer 1. And you can see there a Piper Malibu aircraft, which is a 6-seater aircraft. It flew out of Cranfield Airport in September last year, and it was powered by a powertrain that has a hydrogen fuel cell, and it's zero carbon emissions. They're developing now their second program, which is improving that powertrain, making it larger for a 19-seater aircraft. The next aircraft that you see down there is the vertical aerospace aircraft. There are many on the advanced air mobility side of things. Different approaches. Some of them use batteries to power the aircraft. Some of them use, again, hydrogen fuel cells. All of those will and can, general aviation, advanced air mobility, short commuter, hub aircraft, can leverage zero emission technologies. The question is on the middle size. You can see there a concept is a distributed propulsion aircraft that was launched by Airbus last year. It's a concept. They have a few concepts and they're aiming to have first entry into service at about the year 2035 with their first aircraft that is zero carbon emission, most likely hydrogen or a hydrogen hybrid, hydrogen combustion with fuel cells. And the point with this aircraft is that the industry is not established yet. There's a lot to play for. The impact will be huge, zero carbon emissions, and the market is also expected to be considerable. So we are starting to invest in that side of the market as well as the core technology. Next slide, please. So now that I have given you a bit of an overview on aviation impact on the environment, and we have focused on decarbonisation, let me talk about my third and last point, which is to give you a very brief overview of the ATI program and where we're investing the 3.2 billion and through the 343 projects that I mentioned. About half of our portfolio is invested in propulsion and power technologies, followed by aerostructures with a quarter of the portfolio. The systems area has been growing ever since we started the ATI. We started at about 11% investment on systems. There's a very strong community in the UK in the systems area and growing. And 50% of the portfolio is solely dedicated towards decarbonisation. Also, about 90% of all the projects that we have some sort of aims towards addressing environmental impact, be it on the materials, on the noise, and all of the other areas that I mentioned before. We have seen in the past few years an increase on proposals, an appetite to invest in zero carbon emission technologies, and about 125 million of funding has gone towards those in the last 3 years. Next slide, please. Now, just let me show you a high-level technology roadmap. We divide our roadmaps on our core technologies that I mentioned. These are technologies to make aircraft more efficient, and it's those aircraft that will continue to run on kerosene or sustainable aviation fuels, making those as efficient as possible. Fuel is the highest direct operating cost for an aircraft at about 20% of the cost of operating the aircraft. So anything that we can do to make fuel burn better will improve the operational cost for airlines. The other side of things are the emerging or third-gen technologies. So these are technologies that make planes use other types of energy. I've talked about batteries, hydrogen. And then we have a cross-cutting activity, which is around methods and tools, testing infrastructure, and the backbone of developing all of those technologies, which you can see in the roadmap in purple. And if you go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go into detail because there's a lot of detail on this roadmap, but here you can see how much we have invested in the different areas. At the top level, we have a market-driven technology strategy. So all of the technologies and the programs that we develop need to have an exploitation plan into a platform. So at the top, you can see what platforms we see coming into the future, what new aircraft are coming into the market in future now until about 2040, which is the next generation. We have an area of technologies and wide investment where you see color, either red, blue, or purple, is where we have invested. All of the gray areas are areas that need continued investment. So even though we've spent £3.2 billion so far invested in technologies, for us to be able to decarbonize, we need continued investment and partnership between government and industry. So that's the key to this technology roadmap. And just to finish my talk, if we go to the next slide, please. I guess our ambition and our needs are for aviation to grow in line with people's needs, to connect the world and hopefully allow Stephen to finally fly to Australia, and to do so in a way that does not compromise our values or the opportunities for future generations. And for this to happen, as you have seen, we're looking at what we can do within aviation. There's also a lot we can do in the energy side of things, fuel provision, energy provision, airports, and many other sectors. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to a productive discussion.
Great amount of material there, Christina. Let me bring in our panel. We have a great panel. Our very own Vinny Logandath from the Net Zero Technology Centre and Linda Johnson from Highlands and Islands Airport. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So you've been listening with great intent to Christina's presentation. I'm going to ask one of you just to be brave and start the discussion going. Who would like to ask Christina a question based on what she's just presented to us?
I'm happy to do that, if that's okay. So just to give a little bit of an introduction, Linda Johnston, Head of Business Development at Highlands and Islands Airport. So we operate 11 airports in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland and have a mission to create both social economic benefit and economic prosperity, but also we want to build Scotland's sustainable regional airport group of the future as well. So the work that you're doing, Christina, is absolutely vital for enabling us to meet that vision. And a question, you've talked about the different types of technology that is out there, and I guess we're most interested in the regional aircraft because those, more than 80% probably of our routes are served by aircraft up to 50 seats. What's your thoughts on, electric or hydrogen aircraft being available for that size of aircraft by 2030 and being certified and fit for purpose?
We have some projects. I mentioned the Zero Avia High Flyer 1, which has used that 6-seater Piper Malibu aircraft. They have recently acquired 2 Dornier aircraft, 19-seater, to look at the next step, and they have plans to upscale and extend that technology to look at regional aircraft in future. So it is very feasible. Battery aircraft, limited, very short hops, and possibly not as efficient if you want to carry more passengers, if you want turnaround times to be reasonable at aircrafts because of the time it takes to charge the batteries. That's why most of the community, we have a 54 million program with GKN called H2 Gear, looking at developing a full transmission system for a regional type aircraft, and that one is looking at hydrogen fuel cells. You can turnaround times, refueling for hydrogen is more amenable with having a 30-minute turnaround time or less. I guess the challenge there is the infrastructure. We actually partnered up. I don't know if you're members, but we partner up with Airports Council International World. They are a membership organization representing about 2,000 airports worldwide. Yes, and we launched a document, a report in June, looking at the airport environment and how airports could adopt hydrogen for aircraft use, but also hydrogen to power ground support equipment, buses going from the terminal to the aircraft. There are some airports looking at that globally. And what we did was talk to about 17 organizations, gather their knowledge, what they have been doing in this area and bringing that to an airport environment. Absolutely feasible. We didn't find any technology backstoppers, if you may. Hydrogen is different than kerosene, so refueling procedures will be different. And there's a few gaps that we need to address in terms of training of staff, the hydrogen supply chain into the airports. Do you truck it in? Do you ship it in? Do you bring it by pipes? Do you liquefy it at the airport? Do you liquefy it outside of the airport? The report was focused on providing airports with guidelines, depending on your region, the space availability you have, the energy you have, if you have renewables or not on site or nearby, what your strategy may be to adopt hydrogen slowly in the next few years and decades.
And that's going to be key, isn't it? How do we ensure that the airport infrastructure develops at the same rate as the technology, and which horse do you back to, whether it's electric or hydrogen, to ensure, that you put your money in the right place as well. But yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks.
The Department for Transport, I don't know if you're familiar with the Jet Zero Council. They have two delivery groups. One is the Zero Emission Flight Delivery Group, which is looking at infrastructure as well as airports, as aircraft. And the Department for Transport launched £3 million of R&D funding through the Connected Places Catapult. They're looking at fulfilling some of these gaps. How would airports adopt either battery or hydrogen for use for aircraft? We think that there's more uses as well, not only for the aircraft. You need to leverage, if you invest in the infrastructure to bring hydrogen to the airport, you might as well use it to decarbonize the airport itself as well.
Yeah, and we're involved in UKRI funded Future Flight Challenge projects, which is just doing exactly that up on the island of Orkney, where we are developing a sustainable aviation test environment so that we can kind of bring back those hydrogen electric aircraft. We just had the first hybrid electric aircraft flight this week, in fact, but to work with these technology developers to ensure we do get the infrastructure, and we're looking at all of this and using as much renewable energy produced locally as possible as well. So yeah, there's a challenge there.
So I just want to come in there, just clarify for me, Christine, when you say short haul, what exactly does that mean? Is it Aberdeen to London, or what's the distance we're talking about?
So if you're talking about battery powered aircraft, we're talking about 100 miles range, something like that, depending on whether it is fixed wing, which requires less power to take off, or whether it is vertical takeoff and landing, which requires a lot of energy to take off, because you're hovering and you're lifting the weight like that. When you're talking about fuel cells, we could see something in the range of perhaps 250 miles, 300 miles, if you push it. Anything beyond that, then you're looking into hydrogen combustion.
Okay, so there's still a long way to go in terms of range for both of these technologies you're talking about. At this point, maybe I could bring Vinny in. Vinny, I know you probably got a few comments to make on that as well.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen, and hello, Christina. I think thanks for presenting a comprehensive picture of the aviation sector. I think doubling of the passenger capacity every 15 years was an eye-opener to just scale the problem out there. I think just jumping on the question that you just mentioned on the short-haul flights, I think you've come across this air taxis, and I think that's where I want to come with. Looking at the short-haul transport, where do you stand from a sustainable perspective of using, land-based non-zero carbon transport versus air taxis?
I don't think air taxis are going to displace road transport in the foreseeable future. They're just different types of mobility for highly congested areas, highly congested systems. Our view on advanced air mobility and these vertical takeoff and landing vehicles is that we have the great opportunity that they're being developed now and therefore should be zero carbon from the start. So they could replace some of the rotorcraft activities and so on. It's just that the way that they're powered currently with batteries or fuel cells, they may not reach the range or the capability that a conventional rotorcraft aircraft does today. So I don't see a way where they would massively displace cars or trains. Also, road transport will decarbonize faster than aviation. So we see a market for them, but it's for very specific routes and in very specific environments.
Yeah,
does that answer your question?
It does. And if I can squeeze another question, Stephen, is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think let's fast forward 2050, and I think this is a burning question amongst the audience, as like myself. Do you see fossil fuels being part of the aviation sector? So that's the first question. And if you see that, then will carbon offsets be one of the pathways to achieve net zero? And because many consider that as greenwashing, so what's your thoughts on that?
I would say it is greenwashing if the offset programs don't have the credentials. And we're here to ensure that the offsetting programs have the credentials. I do see fossil fuels still being around by 2050. Now, if we looked at 2060, 2070, then the landscape is different. Sustainable aviation is a coalition. They look at aircraft technology, but also very much more so now at sustainable aviation fuels. From a UK perspective, they see that by 2050, the UK could be producing these sustainable aviation fuels, which are not fossil-based for the UK aviation, and the production rate could cater for about 30% of the market of what we need in terms of fuels. That tells me that the other 60%, the other 70% would come from fossil fuels still, unless if there's a breakthrough in hydrogen aircraft and so on. And I will say that sustainable aviation fuels, if we can produce them at scale and if they can be integrated in a timely manner, they are our option to decarbonize the most, more than technology and so on. However, the sustainability criteria needs to be there and needs to be actually sustainable. SAF produce emissions just as kerosene. The emissions are the same from the tailpipe. It's just that the life cycle emissions from the feedstock and so on are offset. So they're net zero. They're not zero carbon like hydrogen is.
Okay, thank you, Vinny and Linda and Christina. It's now time to elicit some questions from our audience. Let's see if we have some questions coming through. So we have a really good one to begin with. What is the likelihood the UK government will include net zero strategy and delayed hydrogen strategy, actually, which was launched today, the 17th of today. So in an aviation demand by 2030 for hydrogen. So we haven't had a chance yet to read that. Maybe you have, Christina, but for the rest of us, What's the likelihood? Do you expect to see it in the hydrogen strategy?
So the transport decarbonisation plan that looked at different transport modes had a hydrogen lane in the roadmaps for aviation, as well as road transport and so on. The hydrogen strategy is more focused on the production and the distribution of the hydrogen rather than the end use. So I'm not familiar as to whether they are going to include end use, and please, correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're more focused on how to produce large quantities of hydrogen and how to distribute them into the economy rather than allocating that hydrogen to different sectors. We hope that they will take into account the requirements for aviation. We not only need hydrogen direct as a fuel for aircraft, we also need a lot of hydrogen to develop sustainable aviation fuels. Hydrogen is a feedstock for sustainable aviation fuels, so we need hydrogen for that. And hopefully government will see that if they have allocated some incentives or some policies towards aviation. Hydrogen is within the RTFO, the Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation already, and others. So, in a loose way, our needs have been included somewhat in the different strategies.
Okay, thank you. And just keep the questions coming through the Q&A button, please. One thing I want to turn to a bit before the next question is you mentioned that the sector is doubling every 15 years. I just wanted to drill down on that a little bit. Is that the long haul element, or is it the short journey element that's really growing fast?
The segment that is growing the fastest is the single aisle market. So these are aircraft that can fly up to about 4,000 nautical miles with 150 passengers. They're the biggest, the largest growing segment. The wide body sector, I'm talking about, a London to Perth or London to Singapore and so on, carrying 300 passengers. It's a more stable market segment. It is growing, probably 1.5% less than the single aisle market. And the regional market keeps growing as different hubs are connecting countries and cities that didn't exist in the past. And Linda probably has seen a lot of that, connecting different islands and different parts. In comparison to the single aisle market, both wide body and general aviation, regional aircraft grow, but not in that huge percentage.
Okay, and I think a follow on from that would be, Linda, I'd like to ask your opinion on this as well. Given the fact that demand is doubling every 15 years, can you see some mitigating factors on that demand? Can you see that actually changing in the midterm? Because we've had the COVID crisis, people haven't flown as much. We're now working from home using Zoom and these kinds of technologies. And obviously more people are becoming aware of the impact of their travel on the environment. So do you think the long-term trend will continue to be that doubling in growth?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's a number of factors that are going to impact on that. And probably number one is going to be the cost and the affordability of air travel in the future. So it's all very well looking at these new technologies and having this absolute focus on delivering sustainable air travel, but it's got to be affordable as well. And I think that's something that's really important, certainly for the regional air services, because a lot of these services are actually lifeline. It's not just about people going on a holiday, it's about people accessing hospital appointments and, getting from the islands to the mainlands for business reasons as well. So I think we will see a lull in business travel, and I think that will recover. I think a lot of people have got used to doing business online, but we've also know there's a pent-up demand for people to get back to face-to-face, especially for into international markets and international business travel where there's a time difference and all the rest as well. And certainly our routes, our UK routes are the London route, certainly from Inverness, they are recovering very quickly at the moment. actually. So I think there is a pent-up demand, and I think leisure travel will continue, but yeah, we've got to make it more sustainable and affordable as well.
Okay. And this building on that point, going back to the whole question of fuels, Christina, and I think Vinny, I'll bring you in on this as well. Biofuels as a means of contributing significantly to carbon reduction. Is that happening already, or are we yet to see the impact of biofuels in the sector?
Very little still. There's a couple of production plants in the world. There's plans for more, and I think it's about 0.1% of all aviation fuel is sustainable aviation fuel, so very, very little. Currently, there are plans of scaling that up massively. Biofuels, from camelina oils, from tallow, or sort of animal fats. Also in the UK, there's a couple of companies, Velocis, Lancatec, looking at, in particular, Velocis looking at waste to fuel, pathways for sustainable aviation fuels. It will take time to ramp up, and there are challenges about the infrastructure. The Jet Zero Council is looking at a mandate for sustainable aviation fuels, which would look at putting, say, a 2% SAF mandate by 2025, a 5% by 2030, something like that. There are various countries who already have SAF mandates, and it's growing. That's all I will say, but it is growing slowly. We need support from government. Supply chains are difficult, and for them to ramp up, they're anywhere between 2 to 4 times more expensive as well. So the community will need incentives to, as Linda said, keep the cost down of flying and doing it more sustainably.
Yeah. And probably to add to that,
Vinny?
Yeah, sorry, Stephen. I think to add to that, I think Virgin Atlantic had conducted a demonstration flight on biofuels very recently, and I see that it's not only biofuels but synthetic fuels I would class it as, and I think that's a growing sector. And I believe when you look at a circular economy approach, capturing carbon, converting that into an aviation fuel, I think that's something that's on the development, and by 2050s would become a major part of the fuel mix. Yeah.
Thanks, Vinny. We've got a question and a comment really coming through from the audience. Very much a congratulations to Linda and the team on the Ampere demo flight this week. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that demo flight again, Linda, just to bring everyone up to speed. And the second part of the question is all about acceptance of the technology, flying controlled airspace with unproven technology. So if you could address that, that'd be super.
So Ampere are, so thank you for that, whoever sent that comment in, that's very kind. Ampere are an American company, American startup company that are looking at electric hybrid technology as the first way of addressing the sustainable aviation issues. So they brought over their Cessna electric eel to Orkney to test a hybrid aircraft. So one normally powered engine and the other one with a battery power. So they did some tests between Kirkwall and Wick airports across the sea this just last week. There are challenges clearly there in terms of, like I say, coming up with a technology that can actually power the size of aircraft that is required for the short hop. And a lot of our services in the Highlands and Islands are either a 9-seater Islander or a 19-seater Twin Otter, and so the technology needs to scale to that type. And as you were mentioning earlier, turnaround times. If you're landing in the Orkney Islands, intra-islands, it can be as little as 5-10 minutes turnaround time before you've got your passengers off, the next one's on and moving on. So there's a lot of challenges there still for the technology to address. The process of acceptance, that's something that certainly with the Future Flight Challenge projects, there's 34 projects involved in the Future Flight Challenge competition, and that is one of the key areas. How do we actually get some of this new technology accepted by the aircraft and operators that are out there just now. And that's part of what our project is looking at. No real insights yet, but yeah, it's going to be absolutely key that we can fly the new technologies in the UK airspace.
Super. I think we have time for one more question, and it's all about the cost of flying, which is a perennial subject. Lots of people say the true cost of flying is not actually reflected in the price of a ticket. And someone from the audience has commented on that, saying their assumption is the cost of flying will increase over time. Do you think that's the case? If yes, do you think there'll be an additional pressure on that growth statistic that you quoted earlier on, a doubling in demand of 15%? Oh no, a doubling in demand every 15 years. So who would like to take that one on? A very kind of controversial question to end the session with, but please just jump in, panel.
Okay, so probably I'll take it on. Probably I'll frame the question a different way around, what do you want the future society to be? So in essence, how do we change the culture of flying? I think I'd be looking at that rather than, flying has to be expensive. I think we'll have to kind of look at the ways that we are living and, what are we trying to do for the future generations. So apologies to both the other panelists here. So, but I think there should be a change around the culture that we tend to operate now, and it has to be expensive and the costs have to be included. So I'm not saying that we completely shut down flying, but from a life cycle analysis perspective, look at the emissions, capture that within your cost of the ticket, and if it's necessary, absolutely go for it. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, that's a very strong statement. So anyone want to pick up on that?
And with carbon price going up, of course, the price of flying will go. What I always say is that aviation is global, and not all governments will have the strong commitments that the UK have. So there may be a situation where the carbon price in some areas of the globe is different than in others, and that will, break the price. There will be a price change and a price increase. Also, aviation growth is very much linked to disposable income. And as large regions of the world increase their living standards and they want to fly, they will be able to do so. If cost of carbon increases as well, there's a demand reduction associated with that. We call that price elasticity. And it's different for different areas of the globe. It's different for different, a low-cost carrier versus a regular carrier. It's different for business travel and tourist travel. So that demand elasticity changes with the price depending on the type of travel.
And Linda, this is a huge subject for a regional airport. So what's your perspective?
We have to be sustainable, but we have to be affordable. Aviation underpins the socioeconomic, the whole socioeconomic prosperity of our region and regions across the world. And we talk about the levelling up agenda. We've got to make it affordable for all, certainly in the regional context. And aviation's making great strides at the moment. We're probably going faster than ferries and some of the sea vessels, etc. And potentially, if we get it right, we might have less emissions through flying rather than some of the long road journeys that we've got, certainly in the Highlands and Islands as well. So I'm still optimistic that aviation is part of the zero carbon answer.
Super. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. Thank you for the great discussion. I would just like to ask everyone to look out for all of our Insight60s. In the past, we've run them for over just about a year now, and we have some terrific discussions all on our website. Please do check in on them. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. Vinny, Linda, Christina, you've been terrific. And
Thank you,
wish you all the best in your endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.